You're listening to KYRS Medical Lake in Spokane, 88.1, 92.3 on your FM dial. Coming to you now, it's Long Waves with Gary Krug. The opinions expressed on Long Waves are solely my own and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of KYRS, its staff, management, or its underwriters. And thank you for joining me on this gray day. I understand we're expecting some snow this afternoon. That ought to be entertaining. Some 3 inches over the next 24 hours. Anyway, boy, what a crazy day. You've had these days, right, when time is contracted, when everything seems to happen more quickly, when everything takes longer to do, when you have one of those days when you lock your keys inside the house. One of those kinds of days. It's been one of those days for me, but now I get to sit here for an hour and just relax and talk to my many friends and listeners. And thank you so much for joining me today. So, yeah, thinking about time and the way we perceive time and the way that time affects us every day. You know, it's so hard to take in the world because it moves so quickly. Or to put it another way, it's, as I believe it was Rifkin who made the comment, that we don't perceive time in many different kinds of frameworks. You know, we kind of think time is this one ongoing bit. But the framework in which we view time and hear time and live time can change dramatically if we think of time in the scale of a day or a week or a life. A lifetime. How many of our thoughts actually extend a lifetime? Remarkably few. How about the life of a nation or the life of an empire? Maybe a few hundreds of years without dramatic change. Or the life of a species, the time frame of a species. A few 100,000, a few million years. And of course, even larger bits of time when we look up at the night sky and realize that the light from some of these stars has been traveling for thousands or even millions or even tens of millions of years. But here back on Earth in our quotidian existence, we tend to perceive time in much tinier fragments. And this has a great deal to do with how we understand the world. Now, if we consider time, for instance, as the time it takes to take in a certain amount of words, say reading a book. A book might take a few days or a week or a few weeks, but there is a nice long span of time in which we have the opportunity to process this book, to let our minds and our brains make connections between what we're reading and what we're not. And reading is a special kind of time because you can stop and go back and reread. It's not unidirectional and linear, like, say, the time of TV, or like the time of the news cycle, or like the time of stories themselves in the news, in media, and social media, wherever. That's a much more fragmented kind of time, and a much more fragmentary kind of time. It's a time that is broken into little chunks, and we have trouble bringing all of these little chunks of time together into meaningful frames and meaningful narratives, stories, memories, thoughts, ideas. It's hard to make the connections when everything goes so quickly, zip, and it's gone. This is extremely consequential when we think about what are the great issues that we should be talking about. We should have long, linear, non-linear, multilinear discussions about events in the world. But if we look at where these things are now allowed to take place, we find this is not the case at all. Think of the recent spasmodic events of politics, so-called, in America. You know, the things that were going on in Iowa, you know, the caucuses, and the news coverage. It's pointillistic. You can focus on one little point, but then there's another little point. But to see the whole picture, to see the whole of a Seurat painting, you have to step back from it and take it in. You have to move forward into it and see the texture and nuance, and then step back out again. Excuse me, and then perhaps from a diagonal on the side. One needs to view events in the world in precisely the same way. But we don't. And so we create a memory hole, a black hole where thoughts and ideas just disappear and apparently never enter our universe again. Maybe, as Hawking said, information is preserved, but I'm not entirely confident even of that. But back to politics and back to the world and events and such. I was struck by a piece by Andrew Bakovich called Off Bounds, Off Limits, or just plain ignored. And in this, the author looks at the questions that none of our appointed political nominees or wannabes or whatever we're calling them, candidates, really seem interested in addressing. Nobody really wants to talk about some things, and this is indicative of some larger issues in the culture. So the debates are largely posturing positions. But what should we be talking about? Right? What should we be talking about? Well, you know, of course, there's always the Islamic State, ISIS, ISIL, Daesh, whatever. And, you know, the usual bellicose nonsense. Smash them, bomb them, carpet bomb them, make the sand glow, blah, blah, blah. I mean, Rubio talking about the gun he bought the day before Christmas as the last defense between ISIS and his family. And geez. And as Bosevich points out, then you have Marco Rubio insisting that when he's president, the most powerful intelligence agency in the world is going to tell us where ISIS militants are, and the most powerful military in the world is going to destroy them. So it's just this nonsense, this posturing that never allows us to get into the depths of the issues here. Right? So let's look into this Bosevich's article, and he gives 6 points. I'm going to give 5 of his and a few of my own. But of course, let's start with the war on terror, so-called, because I already have. We've been doing this for 15 years? Right? George W. Bush started this nonsense. So here we go on about the most powerful military in the world, the finest fighting force in the world, quotes from Bosevich. Why are we not winning it? I mean, this is interesting. Let me quote a few bits here. This is Bosevich. Given the resources expended and the lives lost or ruined, not particularly well is how we are doing. Intending to promote stability, to reduce the incidence of jihadism, and reverse the tide of anti-Americanism among many Muslims, the war has done just the opposite. Advance the cause of democracy and human rights, make that 0 for 4. 0 for 4. Libya, Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan. I've talked about these ad nauseum on the show. I'm back doing it again. It's the story that just won't stop giving. And here are some of the issues that no one discusses, right? Why, for instance, have the Russians been so amazingly successful in Syria, aiding the Syrian Arab army in pushing back Daesh, right, and destroying their command and control structures and destroying logistics and destroying their caravans of oil and destroying their strong points and seizing back large chunks of strategic land? Why have the Russians been so successful when the U.S., who have been there forever, the finest army in the world, the U.S., who have been there forever with the finest army in the world, in 15 years were unable to do in Iraq or in Syria what the Russians were able to do in 2 months? This is interesting. Nobody wants to talk about this. All we get is a lot of Russia bashing. Ooh, Russia bad. Bad Russia. Ooh, Putin's a thug. But through two presidential reigns, George Bush and Barack Obama, very little has been accomplished. No one really addresses the underlying questions of, is this a successful way of going? No. What would be? We're a one-trick pony. Troops, bomb, which either, well, it suggests one of two things. Either the U.S. policy people are so inept, incompetent, and just plain incapable of learning from theirs and others' mistakes, or else it's deliberate. There is no intent to win, to stop, to succeed. Well, that would mean we had to quit giving defense contractors all these billions and billions of dollars. And I read recently that the Defense Department is going to get even more billions of dollars because they've used up all their smart bombs. I don't know what they were bombing exactly, but by and large it doesn't seem to have been terribly successful. But no public discussion of anything other than bomb, bomb, bomb. And bomb, bomb, bomb just creates failed states. And no matter how much you wish that somebody's going to pop up and give stability and whatnot, if that's even what's desired, it never happens. And you don't get the people on side. And you don't create democracy. And you don't create freedom. But those aren't, apparently, the issues either. Why is this not discussed? This is not unreasonable for people to say, why? Well, look, you keep going on like this, and we've been at this for 14, 15 years. Why don't we rethink? Maybe we need some fresh ideas. Why don't we rethink this whole project? Because ideologues never rethink. They stay locked into the ideology. Same is largely true with Brozovich's second point, nuclear weapons. He asks the question, Today, more than 70 years after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, what purpose do nukes serve? How many nuclear weapons and delivery systems does the United States actually need? Good question. Really good question. How many do we need? So just modernizing and upgrading the U.S. arsenal is going to cost, probably $1 trillion over the next 30 years. Just for this. And Brozovich points out that this will be just in time for the 100th anniversary of Hiroshima. Woo! Party! The United States will possess, quoting Brozovich, the United States will possess more flexible, precise, survivable, and therefore usable nuclear capabilities than anything hereto imagined. In effect, the country will have acquired a first strike capability. Well, maybe yes, maybe no, Brozovich, because the rest of the world is not standing still. The Russians are modernizing their nuclear arsenal to keep up with us. The Chinese are developing whole new platforms, including hypersonic delivery systems, which are extremely hard to shoot down because they're maneuverable. How many nuclear bombs does the world need? You know what? While there are just really 3 big countries with nuclear weapons, 3 big players, is it too late to actually talk about nuclear reduction? Oh, wait, that's going to cost Westinghouse and some other companies an awful lot of money. And the people who make the missiles. So we can't even talk about what St. Ronnie tried to do with the strategic arms reduction talks, the START talks. We've abrogated at least one important treaty, and that would have been the ABM Treaty of, I believe it was 74, Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, which was designed to produce stability so that nobody would be tempted to have a nuclear war. But when you start an arms race and somebody looks like they're getting ahead, there's always the intriguing opportunity of a first strike and destroying your opponent before they can seriously retaliate. Why are we not having this conversation? Really? Why? Because China's going to threaten us with nuclear weapons? Over what? The Spratly Islands? Give them the damn Spratly Islands. Let them argue with Vietnam about it. Why is this our issue? Russia? Russia has so little interest in bombing the United States. This is the last thing on their mind. In fact, the only people who really even talk about first use of nuclear weapons are the United States. And we're one of the very few countries in the world who have nuclear weapons who have not renounced first use. We never have. We've always reserved the right to use nukes first because freedom and democracy. But this is insane. This just makes no sense whatsoever. Given the many problems we face, the hideous problems of producing these monstrosities and the plain moral evil of nuclear weapons. This is insane. And the new generation of weapons will make it even easier to use. Ooh, because you can dial up and dial down the blast effect. Madness. Okay, let's move on to a third point. I'm leaving out, as I said, one of Brozovich's points. Assassination. Assassination. Now that the United States has normalized assassination as an instrument of policy, how well is it working? What are its benefits and costs? This, of course, is speaking about using missile-armed drones as a method of extrajudicial assassination. Killing. I mean, does this outweigh the costs, say, to the murder of all of these innocent people? Does it outweigh the costs in terms of the psychological and social effects that tend to pop up when people have had family members killed, children killed, when children are afraid of the blue sky because that's when the drones fly. Is this really something that makes sense to do? Oh, and we've already opened the door, so who else is going to walk through it? And this is a good point. I like this, Abrosovich. This is a good point. Who else might want to play? Because pretty much everybody's getting drone technology these days, and missiles are pretty easy to make. So who? Russia? Russia's got drones. China? China's got drones. Iran? What if all of these other countries start using drones and drone assassinations as a global practice? This just becomes normalized that everybody does it. Oh, we'll hold our breath and stomp our feet and throw our hair ribbons around our bedrooms. Ooh, these other countries are so awful. Why do they do this? And we won't reflect back on where it started and where it got normalized and where it was defended as moral and legal and necessary and all of this nonsense. Abrosovich's next undiscussed thing in the world, Europe. World War II's been over for 70 years. Cold War's been over for 25 years. The Europeans are rich. They're united. They have technologies. And they can make their own weapons, and frequently do, or they buy them from us. Why are we still there? Why are we still there? And there was always, everybody always said, well, Russia will invade, Russia will invade. After World War II, Russia had absolutely no interest in invading Europe. In fact, the whole point of seizing all of those countries, right, the Russian satellite countries in Eastern Europe, was to give the Russians a buffer against Europe. To give them a buffer against Europe. It wasn't Russia who invaded Germany. It was the other way around. Now, sure, there was Poland, where the Germans and the Russians both invaded. But really, there's no likelihood or strategic reason Russia would want to invade Europe. And Europe is eminently competent of defending themselves. Right? The total population of Europe is greater than the population of America. It's more than triple Russia's population. The EU's collective economy, this again from Brasovich, the EU's collective economy is about 18 trillion. And that exceeds the United States, and it exceeds Russia. So why all of these troops, all of these bases, all of this money to posture, to maintain NATO, to garrison Europe and 26 other countries as some sort of moral obligation? Why? It makes no sense, except to project U.S. force not just against Russia, but against Europe and against everyone. Look, we have big bases here. We have Rammstein. We fly drones from this place. We have bases in Italy. We have bases here. We have bases in England. We can forward base aircraft. Against whom? Another little poor Middle East country which we want to bomb to desolation for our own aggrandizement, amusement, and perversion? Seriously? None of this is ever discussed. The necessity, the God-given right to maintain enormous amounts of military power all around the globe to keep the globe safe is a lie. Most people in the world don't view the U.S. as a protector. They view it as a terrorist state to be played. But you can't talk this way and run for politics. I guess my aspirations to become dog catcher of Lower Spokane are forever doomed. I can never run. Alas, I've spoken against the U.S. military. But the military is another thing. You know, we spend so much money on our military, and we are so in debt. Current U.S. debt's around $19 trillion, right? Which actually exceeds the GDP of the U.S., according to Bresovich. Admiral Mike Mullen in 2010, then chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, I'm reading now, described that debt as the most significant threat to our national security. Although in doing so he wandered a bit out of his lane, he performed a rare and powerful and useful service by drawing a link between long-term security and fiscal responsibility. But this didn't last long. Had a little bit of attention, but it really didn't change anything. Congress didn't act because, as Bresovich writes, Congress functions as an unindicted co-conspirator in the workings of this lucrative collaboration of military and state and corporations. I mean, the F-35 being a lovely case in point that I've talked about before. And even Bernie Sanders tried to do right to his constituents back east by ensuring that they had some of the contractors for the F-35 in his state. So it seems that really no one in politics is immune from this, right? Or we look at, the how we had a couple of episodes where the Republicans stomped their feet and held their breath and about authorizing an increase in the debt ceiling. Oh! But as the author points out, this is an excuse for political posturing, laying all responsibility for all that red ink entirely at the feet of President Obama. This despite the fact that he has reduced the annual deficit by 2/3, from $1.3 trillion the year he took office to $439 billion last year. Not a bad trick. Not a bad trick at all. But he's quite right about the politics of it, of just saying it's all Obama's fault, it's all Obama's fault. Look, we tried to stop it. We were going to fight the debt ceiling, and, they actually did crash it once. And that cost us some hundreds of millions of dollars and caused a lot of brouhaha. And as Bresovich points out, if a Democrat wins the White House, the Republicans will continue to care about debt. And if a Republican wins, they won't say a word about debt. You'll never hear it mentioned except to blame it on the previous president, Barack Obama. Everybody knows that's how it goes. And, in the rest of that debt, let's talk about, subsidies to corporations. Let's talk about big ag subsidies. Nobody wants to talk about these things. Right? Little stuff that's all okay, but you cannot mess with the holy trinity of the military industrial. Well, let's make it a holy quaternary. The military industrial congressional complex. There we go. So all of this just slips into the memory hole, and we end up talking about the wrong things, and the real things slide away without thought or memory or even a kind of, scratching of your head going, did something just slip by me? I don't know, maybe. Maybe, maybe. And it's funny how various groups in the world use this memory hole to advance whatever crazy theories they want to advance. I have two for you. One is about the Chicago police, who are concerned, deeply concerned, the Chicago cops, about the how the ACLU and some of its lawsuits have forced them to quit doing all the stop and frisk they were doing, where you just randomly decide somebody looks wrong and you get to stop and frisk them, right? And true enough, there's been an escalation in gun violence in Chicago. Some of it from, the side of the police, particularly in the killing of 17-year-old Laquan McDonald. But the cops are saying that because they can no longer do this kind of stop and frisk, because they can no longer randomly, well, not quite randomly, rather selectively harass individuals on the street, that cops don't even want to do their job. They just stop policing. Well, hell, they're in the wrong damn job then, aren't they? Aren't they? There are lots of ways to police smart that don't involve stopping and frisking people on the street. Interestingly enough, when New York City dropped the stop and frisk thing, same kind of argument was made. But the number of the number of police stops went down about 75%. But also the number of shootings and murders dropped by 29%. And the murder rate overall fell to a historic low in 2013. Wow. So what has the ACLU been arguing in Chicago? Well, that the police provided an unlawful answer or failed to provide enough information to justify the stop in over half of the stops reviewed. Black Chicagoans were stopped at a rate of 72% of the stops, even though they only make up 32% of the city's population. Well, maybe the problem is they're looking at the wrong kinds of criminals. They're looking for the wrong kinds of criminals. They're looking for street criminals. They're not looking for the big criminals. They're looking for little guys. And even so, it makes no sense. What's really going on with the police here? Well, again, we have to put it in a larger context. And there are a number of contexts into which we could put this story. But the biggest one is the ongoing militarization of the police departments in general, which segues out of this worship of the military we see generally, where support our troops has come to mean you cannot have an argument against what seems to be an illegal and immoral war, or a war fought in the wrong ways. You're not supporting our troops. Why do you hate America? Why do you hate our troops? All right. So we have that level. And then we have these events, like at the NFL and whatnot, where it's a tribute to our troops. And it looks like, just the teams got together, or the cheerleaders or somebody decided it'd be cute if they came out in little skimpy camo outfits and danced around at slave wages. But it's not the teams, and it's not the cheerleaders, and it's not the owners. It's the U.S. military itself, which supplies the money and sees these as PR events to mold public opinion in particular ways, in ways that are increasingly blindly supportive of the military. And the most immediate human form of the military are the men and women we see in uniform around us. They serve the military. They are not the military. And the military is not them, by and large. By and large. But, well, think about it. Soldiers, active duty soldiers, board airliners ahead of everybody else. Right? They're thanked for their service. Total strangers stop them on the street. Thank you for your service. That's interesting. I have no issue with that as a thing. I'm just curious about why is it the military? And why not kindergarten teachers? Or elementary school teachers? How about nurses? Thank you. Thank you for going the extra mile. Thank you for taking a difficult job that a lot of people wouldn't want to do and doing it well. Why the aggrandizement of the military? It's deliberate. It's not this upwelling from inside of us. It's a clever PR campaign that's been largely successful. But again, that's another one of those things we're just not supposed to talk about, you know? There have been times in cultures where, say, professors were held in high esteem. In Germany prior to World War II, professors had special cards that gave them privileges. They would commonly go to the head of a line. They would be asked to please take my place in the line because there was an esteem for people who had devoted their lives to knowledge and to teaching, not to killing and destruction. We really seem to have slipped out of that one and apparently are unable to remember a time when we esteemed members of our public other than the military. It's not that I think most professors want to walk around and have people say, Sehr geehrter Herr Dr. Professor oder Frau Dr. Professorin. I don't know. Very esteemed, very honored Mr. or Ms. Dr. Professor. Right. I don't think professors are actually wanting that to happen, but it's indicative of how the values have changed in ways that we don't even remember. I mean, professors may have been eccentric, for example, but they were esteemed. School teachers were once esteemed. Nurses were once esteemed. They had a status in the community for what they did. But now it's just the military. Occasionally cops. But again, we're back to the militarization of the culture. Look where the honor is laid. And look why it's being laid there. Another thing, we just never seem to get around to talking about. And isn't that peculiar? On the other hand, we seem to be awfully precious about ideas we hold close to our chests or that we press between the pages of our Bibles like fresh-picked clover. Awfully precious about that. Example here from Maryland. A Maryland couple is suing the Charles County schools in federal court after objecting to their daughter's world history lesson involving Islam. Now, what this family has done is they've retained or been recruited by the Thomas More Law Center, and John Kevin and Melissa Wood are naming the county schools, its board, the principal, vice principal of the high school as defendants, alleging their daughter was forced to profess and write out the Islamic creed in her world history class as part of an assignment. Translated, she had to memorize some of the tenets of Islam, because there's no creed, there are some tenets of Islam. There is no God but God, and Muhammad is his prophet, and on like that. But to say these does not make one a Muslim. To say these merely demonstrates that someone has some knowledge of some religion other in the world, and as we're currently engaged in fighting with a bunch of Muslims on the other side of the planet, Muslim extremists to be precise, why would anybody not want to know as much about them as they could? To speak the words is not to profess, but these words even had to pass her mouth or at the end of her pen. Oh my God, it's just horrible. The school didn't allow her to opt out of learning about Islam. Even worse, I mean, this is really awful. Even worse, she was forced to study Hinduism and Buddhism, because heaven knows you just study that stuff and instantly you're recruited into it. It's so threatening. Just learning their ideas. What are the tenets of their religion? How does it work? What's the belief structure? Blah, 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 blah. We used to call it comparative religion. It doesn't mean you're putting in which one's better now. Let's see, we got Ganesha over here and Brahma, yeah, and over here we got Muhammad and you know, it's not like that. And let's see, well, you know, Ganesha's cute, he's an elephant and all, and you know, Muhammad's got that mysterious desert thing going on, and you know, this is not what comparative religion is. But this is a level at which these people sit. Even hearing the ideas of these religions is threatening to them. To be threatened by the ideas of another is a weakness. To refuse to hear the ideas of another is cowardice. And it is just way too precious to take umbrage at anything that isn't, at hearing anything that isn't what they believe. Take umbrage at it and sue the school and everybody in it. Well, the school issued a statement, Charles County Schools did, a clarification of its world history curriculum, which I shall read. The particular unit in question is on the formation of Middle Eastern empires, in which students learned the basic concepts of the Islamic faith and how it, along with politics, culture, economics, and geography, contributed to the development of the Middle East. Other religions are introduced when they influence or impact a particular historical era or geographic region. For example, when reviewing the Renaissance and Reformation, students study the concepts and role of Christianity. I hope that's Catholic and Protestant. When learning about the development of China and India, students study Hinduism and Buddhism. Why are we so afraid of ideas? Because we have no long sense, no long waves of understanding. And so the idea that knowledge could be helpful, useful, enlightening, entertaining, used for guidance, just slips away. And we fall back on what we know. I know what I know, and it's all, and you can't tell me nothing. If I've heard that once in my life, I've heard it 1,000 times in many dictions, many dialects, many occasions. And it all just slips away. No examination of the world means no examination of yourself. And that's always a road to trouble. I'm running a little bit short on time here, but I wanted to talk about a few more things that slipped through our memory hole. And this is drawing on Senator Elizabeth Warren's recently released executive summary called Rigged Justice: How Weak Enforcement Lets Corporate Offenders Off Easy. Right? So she's done a white paper, if you will, on big corporations and who gets punished and who doesn't. This is important because, we had a banking crash. Remember that? Remember when the banks crashed? And the administration at the time, the Bush administration, actually, according to Ms. Warren's report, well, I'll read it to you, that section. To take just one example, federal regulators in the Bush administration and the independent banking regulatory agencies had the legal authorities they needed to stop much of the fraudulent and high-risk conduct that led to the 2008 financial crisis, a crisis that cost millions of people to lose their homes, their jobs, and their savings. But regulators sat on their hands, paving the way for a devastating economic crisis and billions, trillions actually, in taxpayer bailouts. When federal agencies fail to enforce certain laws, especially those laws that are intended to curtail misconduct by large corporations and their senior executives, the consequences can be devastating. And she's quite right. They still are. And, the Bank of Scotland says we're up for another one this year. It's telling its people to get all their money out of the markets. Well, good luck with that. But here's the bit. Let me just quote a few things from Senator Warren's summary that I think are important to what we're doing here. Laws are effective only to the extent that they are enforced. A law on the books has little impact if prosecution is highly unlikely. This country devotes substantial resources to the prosecution of crimes such as murder, assault, kidnapping, burglary, and theft, both in an effort to deter future criminal activity and to provide victims with some degree of justice. That's important, to provide victims with some degree of justice. When the uber-rich crashed the banks, when they crashed the market, when they manipulated interest rates, when they lied, when they paid Moody's to mark as AAA investments things that were largely excrement wrapped in pretty toilet paper, people were hurt. Families were hurt. Businesses were hurt. And nobody on the losing end of that game got any sense of justice out of it. Let me read on from a little further down. The failure to publish big corporations or their executives when they break the law undermines the foundations of this great country. If justice means a prison sentence for a teenager who steals a car, but it means nothing more than a sideways glance at a CEO who quietly engineers the theft of billions of dollars, then the promise of equal justice under the law has turned into a lie. Here again is another truth we're not supposed to talk about. The promise of equal justice under the law has turned into a lie. Now, wouldn't that be interesting at the presidential debates? But of course they can't do that. Because first of all the Republicans had to run off to the Koch brothers and Sheldon Adelson and other right-wing billionaires and convince them that they would do the bidding of these billionaires. And Secretary Clinton had to run off to the big banks and a number of other large corporate contributors and convince them, assure them that she would do their bidding. So there can be no conversation, no debate about this. And Ms. Wasserman Schultz of the DNCC will make sure that this does not happen. Equal justice under the law has turned into a lie. The failure, she continues, the failure to prosecute big, visible crimes has a corrosive effect on the fabric of democracy and on our shared belief that we are all equal in the eyes of the law. But as we learned in Animal Farm, some animals are more equal than others. And so back into the memory hole we go. Back into all of the things we're not allowed to talk about and all of the trivia we are allowed to talk about. And the rest of it just never gets mentioned. In this white paper, Senator Warren notes that of the 20 cases that she's presenting in this white paper that are especially egregious, only one of them went to trial. And most of them didn't even require an admission of guilt as part of the settlement. And thus, it's not possible to officially tag them and their executives for crimes. Right? Even so, each case has been widely reported and widely admitted, facts that on their face raise a prima facie case of unlawful conduct. These corporations paid millions or billions of dollars to make these cases disappear before any public hearing. If each of these cases had gone to trial, it's possible that some of the companies might have raised a defense that could have created a reasonable doubt in jurors' minds. But that's precisely the problem here, because the prosecutors never took any of these corporations or their executives to trial. There was never a need for anyone to answer in court under oath for their actions. And if we go through this list, it's a who's who of criminal organizations who just can't stop. Standard & Poor's, Citigroup, JP Morgan Chase, Barclays, USB, Royal Bank of Scotland, Massey Energy Company, General Motors, Novartis, on and on and on. And now, well, according to Ms. Warren's report, she writes, currently Republicans are using a bipartisan bill intended to reduce mandatory sentences for low-level drug offenders as a vehicle for an amendment to make it harder for federal prosecutors to prove that white-collar criminals violated hundreds of different laws. So we are going to make sure that no one goes to jail in the future. And we can't talk about that either. We can't talk about this systemic and structural inequality that stems from this. Not by accident, by plan, by design, from the Koch brothers, from the ALEC Institute and all of the people that fund them, the American Legislative Exchange Council, from all of them. These are the people who are at war with us. These are the people who are digging the memory hole currently. And, of course, companies like GE or Lockheed and Boeing and Honeywell and Raytheon and on and on and on and on. If there is no debate on these subjects, why should we vote for any of these clowns? If people are not bringing forth the arguments we want to hear, the things we think are important, why are we not demanding it or refusing to listen to them? This is not the only game in town. This is a traveling circus that comes around every 4 years. We gawk at the elephants. We go to the freak show. We watch a geek eat a light bulb, and we call it politics. And we never wonder why things never change. Well, that brings me to the conclusion of today's show. Thank you so much for joining me today. You've been listening to Long Waves Radio on KYRS. You can email me at longwaves@kyrs.org. Find me on Facebook, Long Waves Radio. You can also see podcasts, which I'm reasonably up to date with now, on YouTube. Just search for Long Waves Radio in quotes. Quotes are important. And you'll turn it right over. You can also find links on the Facebook page. But before I wrap up, I want to mention, as I try to do every week, as I hopefully do every week, that if you've got a car, truck, boat, pretty much any vehicle at all that you want to get rid of, or you're just tired of looking at, doesn't matter if it runs or not, we don't care. We will arrange to have it picked up. You get a nice tax receipt for a donation. We get a few pennies to help keep the lights on down here. And you also get this lovely warm feeling. So it's easy to do. All you have to do is make one phone call. We'll do the rest. You call 855-597-7227. Arrange a free pickup. Everything will happen just like I said it would. And life will be better for everyone. So, again, to get rid of that car, truck, boat, 855-597-7227. Thank you again for listening. You are listening to KYRS Medical Lake Spokane, 88.1 and 92.3 FM. I'll be back next week with another show. I love hearing from you, so please email, pop on Faceplant, say something, say what you want to hear. Say what you like, say things you'd like to see done differently. I love hearing from my listeners. Until next week, take care, be smart, and remember. Bye-bye.